torment level. So that's a bit more intricate. I can't words. Hello everybody and welcome to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the information that was rather politely dumped upon us in the last campfire chat with regards to patch 2.0 and the Vessel of Hatred in Diablo 4. Now, there was quite the plethora of information that we were given. Some of it I'm very, very happy to see. A lot of it is things that I've criticized in the past and even suggestions that I've made and others have made. So I'm glad to see those are coming about. Some changes I'm kind of like, really? And others have yet to be seen, at least until we get to try them, which thankfully isn't going to be too far away. On Wednesday, the 4th of September, we will be able to access the PTR and basically play around with all these new systemic changes that are coming to the game. Now, to be clear, these are changes that are for patch 2.0, not necessarily for the Vessel of Hatred. So we'll be able to experience all the systemic changes, but we won't be able to play the Spiritborn or experience any of the Vessel of Hatred dedicated content, just to be clear. So let's jump into it. Firstly, we've got this sort of level squish that's coming about. Basically, the TLDR is the numbers got ridiculous. I also think they're also setting themselves up for level increases in future expansions, and I think there's a bit more going on behind the scenes. But what they've told us is that they're doing a bit of a level squish. So the max level is technically going to be 60 now. And then Paragon levels or Paragon points are going to be this new account-wide and separate thing. I'll go into a bit more detail about the Paragon momentarily. But yes, so you're now going to have level 1 to 60. Because of that, you're going to have an additional 10 skill points. And all the numbers, the life numbers, the damage numbers, everything like that, it's all being like squished down to represent this new level cap more accurately. And that way we're not seeing billions and trillions of damage popping up on our screen and it's not really readable and it doesn't really make sense. And I agree that whilst the impact to, and I think this is something we should clarify, like the amount of damage you deal whilst the number being represented on screen is smaller, the ratio of damage that you're doing to the monster isn't any different really to what you would have seen before. It's just the numbers won't look as stupid, basically. That's the point they're trying to get across. So I think that's a really good idea. Now, as I mentioned, this means that Paragon is being treated slightly differently. So now Paragon isn't just per character, it's going to be account wide. So if you had 200 Paragon points on one character, you have 200 Paragon points on all characters, which will mean that if you make an alt or a secondary or tertiary character, they immediately inherit all the Paragon points that you've had from the previous character that you made, your first character of that season, or all of your characters on the Eternal Realm, for example. This, of course, means that leveling alts is significantly quicker. It's going to be a bit more appetizing. I think one thing with Diablo 4 is once you'd made one character, you weren't really incentivized, I don't think, for the most part, to make more than one character per season. It was kind of a one and done thing. I would argue that's mostly because of how you find items, because in other games, you tend to find the items for your alts on your first character anyway, whereas in Diablo 4, you kind of have to do the item find each time with each character. So you may have one or two of the uniques that you want, but everything else you have to farm again. However, being able to just immediately inherit all of the Paragon points right off the bat is very, very appetizing, and it's something that I think a lot of players will agree is the right move to make. The developers themselves have stated the following: the changes to leveling and Paragon were made with the intent of getting you to endgame activities and gear at a more rapid pace and making it easier to ramp up your alt characters for the fight ahead. Like I said, this obviously makes sense. One, it means that you're more likely to play the game more, which from their perspective also means you're more likely to spend money in the shop, which I know is a very cynical point of view, but that is literally the point of a live service. The longer you play, the more likely you are to spend money. And of course, having people leave the game after a week because they've done the one character and buggered off to another competitor, again, it makes sense that they're going down this route. Now, there are other changes coming to the Paragon boards. This one, some of it I think is smart and a good idea. And some of it I'm like, that is kind of counterintuitive to what you're trying to achieve kind of thing. And I'll explain what I mean. You're now going to be specifically limited to 5 Paragon boards in total. Now, to be clear, I'm not sure if that includes the starting board. I would assume it does. And the reason behind this is they want people to not just rush the glyph node. They've explicitly stated that people are basically just going, let's get as many boards as we can, ignore everything else on the boards, and just get to the glyph nodes, which is true. The vast majority of builds that you will see is just basically try and get usually 6 boards as well as your starter board, and then just get all the glyphs that you need, ignoring all the rare nodes and sometimes most of the legendary nodes and things like that. And there's no real thought put into the Paragon board system by the player. They just want the best nodes and the path of least resistance to get to them. So by limiting how many boards that you can actually use, it means that they can rebalance the boards in such a way where they can put more power in the legendary nodes, for example, in the rare glyph, or in the rare nodes rather, and things like that. However, they've basically nerfed or made all of the rare nodes really generic and boring. They've taken out all of the the nodes that would have been quite interesting or specific to certain types of builds. Like the sorceress has stun, or had in this case stun nodes that would have worked really well with lightning builds. Now all of the rare nodes are pretty much vulnerable damage, critical damage, life, res, and a bit of armor, like all of them. And I think it's kind of counterintuitive to what they wanted to do. They were like, we want you to put more thought in the builds, so we made them more generic. That being said, the legendary nodes, they've been tweaked. They do seem a bit more interesting. They've made a new Paragon board for each class, which subsequently comes with this new legendary node. And then there's also an actual fundamental change that is being brought to the glyphs themselves, which is they're making them more powerful. So everything is about the glyphs. Now, I actually like the change that they're making to the glyphs, which I'll go into in a moment. But again, it kind of counters the point that they're like, we want you to put more thought into it, and then we're going to just make everything about the glyphs. And I digress, but the glyphs themselves, they are now going to be not just up to level 21, they're going to go all the way to level 100. Now, what I'm about to tell you might sound awfully familiar. In fact, there's going to be a lot of things that I say throughout this video where you'd be like, I'm getting deja vu. What is going on here? And the meme that has pretty much come out of the campfire chat, and I immediately tweeted it when I noticed it myself, is it's Diablo 4 Vessel of Diablo 3. So glyphs now will not be leveled up via experience. They will get basically a chance to rank up based on the level of the pit that you're doing. More on that in a moment. So you'll be going through the pit, and basically if you do a pit level that is substantially higher than the current rank of the glyph, you then get additional ranks just added to the glyph. It's not done through experience, it's done through a chance to roll. If it's at least 10 ranks above the pit level is at least 10 ranks above the glyph level, it's a guaranteed rank up. And then for every 10 on top of that, it's an additional rank on top of that as well, if that makes sense. So for Diablo 3 players, you're probably thinking, that sounds a lot like those gems, jewel things that we used to have. Yes, yeah, absolutely. It does seem like they've gone, you know what, this worked in Diablo 3, the players liked it, so why don't we just do it that way? And you know what, fair play to them. Like, it's kind of bewildering that it took them that long to realize that, if anything. But, you know, they're making the change now, and this is going to be for both people who play the vanilla game as well as those of you who play Vessel of Hatred. Now, additionally, what they've added is at level 46, I'm not sure why it's 46 and not 50. I'm sure there is a reason behind it. But at level 46, the radius of the glyph will also increase as it does at level 21 or 15. There was a bit of confusion with that in the video. One of those numbers is correct. I can't recall which one, but yeah, you've got the radius increase, and then there's a secondary one at level 46. But also the glyph will then inherit a new modifier and become legendary. For example, I can't remember the exact numbers. I'll put it on screen. But the example they showed us was the glyph would inherit a additional crit chance, I think it was, the crit chance or crit damage, and it was multiplicative as well, so they get quite a beefy buff at level 46, and then that will increase further and further until you get to level 100. Forgot to mention earlier as well, by the way, you will be able to get 300 Paragon points in total, so it has been increased. As I mentioned earlier, you're now going to be leveling up your glyphs through the pit. Now, the reason for this is they've basically swapped the rewards of the pit with nightmare dungeons. Now, some of you, myself included, upon initially hearing that, are probably groaning, going, oh, nightmare dungeons are still wank. However, they've actually made, I think, a pretty good change to nightmare dungeons, which I'll elaborate on in a moment. But yes, almost everything in the game is going to be measured by the pit in one way or another. The pit is becoming the backbone or the barometer of everything that scales in Diablo 4. You'll be able to use it as your measuring stick. And now, again, I'll elaborate a bit more on that later when we talk about the changes they're bringing to the difficulty system. So you'll be finding yourself probably in the pit a lot more than perhaps what you were in previous iterations of the game. I think that's fine. Some of you may not like the pit, and I get it. I think the changes to the glyph system and the rewards you get are going to probably win a few players over, because it's not going to be like, here's a sprinkling of crafting rewards as it felt like before. It's going to be more indicative of, one, how well you're doing in the game, because it's basically replacing capstone dungeons in a way, but also because you're going to be leveling up your glyphs. And if you're doing alt characters, leveling up the glyphs for your characters significantly quickly. Brings us on quite nicely to the next big change that they're making, and that's the changes to the difficulty system and how they will tie in with the pit. Now, funnily enough, I had actually written a script for a video that I was going to make talking specifically about the world tier system and how it was dumb. I was going to call it "The World Tier System is Dumb, This Is Why." A catchy name, I know. But now they've made those changes pretty much to how I would have suggested they made them. So this script can now go in the bin, and that video will never see the light of day. The world tier system is bad, and this is why. When you're designing a game and implementing a difficulty system, there are two specific core reasons for having a difficulty system. The first is so that you can add a level of control for the player to set the level of difficulty or challenge they wish to engage in. Some players want the game to be more difficult so they can get a better or greater sense of achievement once completing it. Sometimes it comes with some additional rewards like increased experience or item rewards, things like that, depending on the game. But more often than not, it is just to feel better about yourself when you beat it. The second reason is to allow for players to have more accessibility to the game. Maybe they have a physical or mental disability. Maybe they just have a skill gap where they are not able to progress through the game. So they give these players the level of control to lower the difficulty, enabling more people to be able to play and enjoy their game. The world tier system in Diablo 4 does neither of these two things. In fact, the world tier system currently in Diablo 4 does nothing. It's completely and utterly arbitrary. You go through either World Tier 1 or 2, usually World Tier 1 because it's quicker. You then get to World Tier 3. You get through World Tier 3 as fast as possible so you can get to World Tier 4. You're not actually given any choice. You have to go essentially through all the world tiers anyway, so it's not optional. And of course, if you are lowering the difficulty for an accessibility option, you're then straight up locked out of content. Originally, if you weren't doing World Tier 3 or 4, you couldn't even get unique items. You were locked out of Hell Tides, Nightmare Dungeons, all of the endgame content effectively, other than Whispers, if I recall. So if you had an accessibility issue, the World Tier system basically meant that you could not progress whether you wanted to or not. There was no prestige or extra greater sense of achievement received for the players because everyone had to eventually do World Tier 4 anyway. It was mandatory. Now, over the past couple of seasons, obviously the devs have noticed this and they've started introducing things into the World Tier systems at lower tiers, such as being able to find unique items. The fact that that was their original idea, to gate unique items behind a difficulty system where you were obliged to play it anyway at such a late point in the leveling journey. In an action RPG where the carrot on the stick for the vast majority of players is being able to find the unique item that they've been after this entire time. Thankfully, they saw sense though, and they've seen even more sense, and you're going to get that slight, if you're a Diablo 3 player, deja vu appearing once more. So, the new system is going to be, one, an actual difficulty system, but also then broken down into two parts. So whilst you're leveling or going through the campaign, you will have 4 difficulties: normal, hard, expert, and penitent. You will get to pick one of these, obviously depending on If it's your secondary character and you've already got some loot, you're probably going to go for hard or expert. And maybe if you're feeling really beefy or happy or confident with your build during the leveling process, you can go to penitent. I suspect most people would just min-max it and go for hard or expert so they can just get to the secondary system as soon as possible. Now, if you're new to the game, I assume these are only for the first time playthrough, so there are some slight restrictions, and I'll go through them now. So to unlock the difficulties, normal and hard are unlocked by default. Expert is unlocked after completing Diablo 4's prologue, and then Penitent is unlocked after reaching level 50. Now I assume you only have to do that once. I might be wrong, please do not hold me to that. They don't really explain it, but I assume once you've done it all on one character, your future characters can just go straight into Penitent and whatnot if they so choose. The secondary difficulty system is the Torment system. So once you've completed either the campaign or you've gotten all the way to level 60, you can then start doing the pit. It will unlock the first 20 levels of it, so 1 to 20, and then upon completing tier 20 of the pit, that will then unlock Torment level 1, which will then unlock the next 15 tiers of the pit. If you do tier 35, that will then unlock Torment 2. Then if you do pit level 50, that will unlock Torment 3, so on and so forth. Then once you're in Torment 4 and you do all of the unlocked pit levels there, I believe the pit will continue to increase, but in smaller increments. I can't remember if it was 5 or 10, but it won't be going up in 15s anymore. And that is so you can still progress and like test your metal and all that shenanigans. So how does the difficulty actually scale in Torment levels? It's not just a simple case of higher Torment equals bigger damage. They adjust the AI of the monsters. So the higher the Torment level, the more likely they are to be accurate, to track you with some of their skills, things like that. There are also these curses that they've added. So for example, Torment level 1, you will have minus 250 armor and minus 25% to all resistance. That will scale all the way to Torment 4, where you'll have minus 1000 armor and minus 100% all resistances. The monsters will, of course, also have more damage and more health as well, but do bear in mind there is more to it than just simply bigger numbers. There's also another change that might seem insignificant at first, but monsters no longer have like a monster level. So they'll still kind of scale with you as you're leveling up to 60, but then once you get into Torment, they're no longer scaling to your level thereafter. They just scale to the difficulty, so you can overcome a difficulty, say Torment level 1, and then if you just want to play Torment level 1 and destroy everything really, really quickly, you can do that, and in some cases it may even prove better, depending on what build you're playing when it comes to farming for loot and things like that. As you can see, as I mentioned previously, you're going to be spending a lot more time in the pit because that's what's going to unlock these difficulty levels and how you're going to basically measure your power whilst upgrading your glyphs at the same time. So I think this is a good segue to talk about nightmare dungeons. So you're no longer leveling up your glyphs via nightmare dungeons. Instead, nightmare dungeons are going to be your new source for your crafting materials, for your master crafting and whatnot. Now, as I also said before, when I initially heard that, I did groan. I audibly groaned. My laptop was on my lap. I was in bed, and I was just like, oh no, there's still going to be wank. But later on, someone asked in the Q&A, because they kind of forgot to mention it during the body of the campfire chat, but how you're going to get the crafting materials does change. It's no longer just going to be I'm going to ignore everything in this dungeon and just zoom to the end of it. You're going to be getting your crafting materials from all sources. So all monsters, obviously more from elite packs. So you're incentivized to actually do the dungeon rather than just zooming to the end. The boss at the end is obviously going to still drop a significant amount, but getting at least the elite packs along the way is actually going to be worth your time now. I genuinely think this is a good change. Is this the best possible change they could have made for Nightmare Dungeons, or the best improvement? I don't know. I'm not really a game designer. However, I do think it is, at the very least, a better version of the Nightmare Dungeons. They're going to feel significantly less grindy because there's actually points to them and actually fulfilling and doing the dungeon and exploring most of it rather than just zooming to the end. And you're probably not going to have to do them quite as often, or at least feel like it's mandatory to do them quite as often, unless you're trying to specifically get a particular mastercraft or something to that effect. Moving on, we have the new class changes, or the updates to skills and passives. Each class gets one new skill. I'm a little disappointed by that personally. Maybe I've just been spoiled by Path of Exile, to be honest. That's quite possibly true. Maybe Path of Exile are just going above and beyond and doing insane shit when they introduce like 20 new skill gems every now and then. But I feel like after an entire year, one new skill for each class in a skill system that is remarkably shallow in comparison to just about every other action RPG out there is a little bit lackluster, if I have to say so myself, which I do think is the case. Each class has got a new skill. They look all right. Sure. Yeah, like some of you might look at a couple of them and be like, oh, that sounds sick. Fair play. I looked at them and was like, yeah, cool, sure. Kind of thing. I was kind of underwhelmed by it personally. I'm not going to go into each and every skill or every like number detail, things like that. Like I'll link the patch notes below the in the description if you want to actually get like the nitty gritty finer details. But for now, there's going to be a new skill. There's going to be 5 new passives. So that kind of fluffs it out a little bit. They are going to be adding extra passives to each skill tree, and I don't mean key passives. I mean like passives in general. You've got those, which is, you know, a little better. They've also said they've added additional connections. So hopefully you're not going to feel obligated to maybe get a passive that you don't want in order to get the one that you do want. Obviously, again, that's yet to be seen, but it seems like they're trying to add more routes amongst the passives themselves. Obviously, the skill tree is still going to be quite linear, so you're still obligated to get a basic skill and at least one passive for a basic skill before you can get to the next segment. I think that's a bit poo-poo, to be honest, since pretty much every build I make eliminates basic skills, but that's just me. Fortunately, there's going to be no other like expansion to the skill system. I still think this is one of the weaker points in the game, and my opinion on the matter is we already had Adam Jackson explain that the reason the skill system is so simple is because during testing, they came across a handful of remarkably stupid people who put every single skill point just into that first wheel when it had a bit more depth to it. And they said that's why they've made it simple. I think that's a bit of a cop-out, if I'm going to be frank. Like, I think they should have basically found a way to properly signpost or articulate to newer players, to the remarkably stupid people to not do that. I feel like, if anything, they haven't actually solved the problem, and then people who were going to do that with their first iterations of the skill system are probably still likely to do that now, because it still doesn't tell you where to go. It just unlocks as you go along. But I digress. I think it's an unfortunate thing that they are trying to make a game for everyone, and in doing so, they lower the skill floor, which is actually fine, but they're dragging down the skill ceiling with it. And as a result of that, it means Diablo 4, in comparison to, again, literally every single other action RPG, actually has significantly less build variety and a lot more illusion of choice than they believe they have. Some of you, like myself, are probably going to be a little bit disappointed to hear that. I kind of expected it based on the statements that Adam Jackson had made regarding the skill tree previously, but I was kind of still hoping a little bit that they would expand and add a little bit more depth to it. Just a smidgen, I beg. Next thing we're going to talk about wasn't something that they announced during the campfire chat, but I think it's relevant to the following topic, and it may be something that you're not aware of if you're not closely following every single video that's been released about Diablo 4. They're adding like a raid, essentially. It's called the Dark Citadel, if I remember correctly, and it's basically a co-op specific dungeon where you want to play with at least one other person, kind of in a similar fashion to how you would play co-op Portal 2. The reason why you need additional players is because there's going to be some functions in the game where you need one of your cooperators to stand on a switch to enable you to get through to another area, so you can stand on another switch so they can get through, and things like that. There's also going to be tactics within boss fights where each player can only parry or rebound a spell once, and it then has to be done by another player, things like that. They've stated that, again, it can be done with 2 people, but the optimal way to play is with a party of 4. Now, there are 2 things I briefly want to touch on regarding like co-op or forced co-op. there's going to be a lot of people who are annoyed by this. They think that Diablo is a single player franchise, and sure, with Diablo 1 and 2, yes, it was single player with optional multiplayer. Diablo 3, likewise, with slightly more push to like playing online, of course, and like playing with other people. But Diablo 4 is not that. Diablo 4 is essentially an MMO light. It's got an open world where you can see other players whether you want to or not. There is no offline mode. There are essentially other forced co-op things like the world bosses and stuff like that. And it's also a game that is supposed to be competing with the likes of Path of Exile. So they're going to be adding a plethora of systems, and not every system is for you. That's, I think, how the game should be designed. If they try and make every single system for every single player, you're going to end up with remarkably dull systems. And I know that's probably hard to hear for some of you because you want to play every aspect of the game, but you don't have to. If you are someone who doesn't want to engage in cooperative play, don't do that dungeon or whatever other mechanics they may come up with in the future. There are other things for you to do. The idea is that they add so many is that there is always something for you to do that you will like, and there are always going to be things that you don't like that other people do. And like I said, that might be a hard pill for some people to swallow, but that's the reality of a live service action RPG, that you have options, and a great many of them. Now they're adding additional options, something that has specifically been requested. A lot of people have asked it for like a raid-like experience, and they're now getting that. So those people are going to be exceptionally happy. Next, we'll get a feature that is probably more catered to people who just want to play on their own. Arguably, you guys have already been given those things already. There's the pit, you can do solo. There's the horde system, whatever it's called, the eternal hordes, I don't know. There's the gauntlet, things like that. So I think it's a little bit silly for the single player Andes to be like, oh, I can't play this system, it's not for me, it's not fair, when you've got so much content that you can indulge in already and will do in the future as well. So the other bit of great news, something again that's been asked for by a great many people with regards to co-op play, is they are actually now adding a party finder. So you will be able to find pickup groups, random people across the world of the internet who can play dungeons, hell tides, I believe even specific quests, whispers, the new raid, basically anything that has cooperative capability. You will be able to set up a search filter to find those people or join people who are already searching for party members. I think this is great. As I literally just said, Diablo 4 is essentially an MMO light, so this will be a great way to find friends in Diablo 4. I think that's something they've needed for a very, very long time. I'm hoping that they add more to like the clan systems as well. I think that would be a great route to take, just to get more community spirit about things. I think if you're going to have multiplayer options in a game, you should support it properly. And I think this is one of the smart ways to go about it. There's also going to be the mercenary system. So like in Diablo 2, you will be able to hire a mercenary. They've added a bit more depth in comparison to Diablo 2, where basically everybody got one specific type of mercenary, and that was one that gave you an aura and therefore a significant buff. However, now the mercenaries are going to have their own skill trees, and they're going to have a bit more interaction with your characters. For example, I believe there's the some berserker lady, I can't remember what name they gave her, but she will get a massacre bonus that will basically unlock more skills and more capability with her and things like that. I'm not sure how I feel about the mercenary system. I think it's going to be a nice addition to the game. I'm just not sure how good it's going to feel. I have a concern that some mercenaries are going to be really potato, and you're just going to be like, why are you here? You bring nothing to me. What? Get out of my house. I have a slight other nitpick to do with like the demon child. Lore wise, it seems a bit sus. Honestly, I'm a lore Andy, especially when it comes to Diablo. I love the franchise. I love the universe. It's one of my favorite IPs. So there's been a lot of things introduced into the game where I'm like, but that never happened. Kind of thing. Why is that how that is in direct contradiction to like the lore? And it, like, I have criticisms about some of the writing in the Diablo franchise, especially in Diablo 3 and also in Diablo 4. But that's probably going to be a nothing burger to most of you, so I won't go into it. But yeah, otherwise you've got mercenaries. It's a nice addition. We'll see how good and meaningful they end up being in the game. I don't believe we can test them out in the PTR though. Do bear that in mind. Again, that's specific to Vessel of Hatred. There's one final thing I want to talk about, and it was like the big reveal of the campfire chat. So I want to temper expectations a little bit before I say the word that will make you cream your pants. This system isn't as in-depth as it was previously. It's a little bit Diablo 4-ized. It's very simple. It's kind of shallow, but rune words are back. What? For those of you unfamiliar with rune words in Diablo 2 were a system where you could get specific runes that would be a word. Some of the words are remarkably simple, like L. And if you socketed these runes into items, the individual rune would have special effects on their own that could benefit you in some ways. Sometimes you would just socket them into a unique item to get that additional effect. But more often than not, what you would do is put them in a specific order and very specific runes to create what was known as a rune word. And rune words in this instance were essentially like a second form of unique, but like a build your own unique. And you would end up with these remarkably powerful items that more often than not had abilities that kind of transcended class archetypes. One of the most famous ones was called Enigma, which gave the class who wore this armor-based rune word teleport, regardless of what their class was. And now they're bringing rune words to Diablo 4. Now, something to be mindful of is in previous games, you could have significantly more socket. In Diablo 4, you are limited to 2, which means that the scope of rune words is already massively limited, and therefore they've slightly adjusted how the system works. The way it works now is the runes are basically broken down into 2 specific types. You have a rune that sets kind of a rule, like you gain this amount of this thing called offering every so much, and then in doing that and achieving that rule, you will then be able to supplement a secondary effect on the second rune type that you can then link together. I'm probably explaining that poorly, and I'll display it on screen. So, for example, we have a back rune here. You gain 50 offering every time you travel 5 meters. Now, they actually showed this one specifically in the campfire chat. You will gain this offering regardless of how you travel. So if you leap, if you teleport, if you fall over and roll, you will gain these offering every 5 meters. You will then link that rune, as you can see, it's got like a little divot here, into another rune. And these runes are the runes of invocation. And then these runes of invocation have a requirement, sometimes a secondary rule, and then an effect. So in this case, you got the jar rune, which requires 50 offering. So you'd have to run for many, many, many meters, but it can be linked with other things as well. There's another one, I believe it's called foe, where you get 1,000 offering if you nearly die or get CC'd. And I've got a feeling people are going to be linking foe to Yar quite a lot. So we'll probably see that as a quite common combination. But yeah, so for example, you eventually hit 500 offering, and that will then enable you to have the ability of replacing your next evade with the sorceress's teleport, blinking further, dealing damage, and becoming unstoppable. So that means you can be any class, get 500 offering, and suddenly you have teleport. Now, there are going to be lots of different runes of ritual, as they've called them. So the activation runes, for lack of a better phrase, that can combine. Some of them will get you the X amount of offering quicker than others. It's going to depend on your build, of course, and on the various situations you're in. As I mentioned, there's one that basically gives you a fuckload as soon as you get CC'd. I've got a feeling that's going to get nerfed. And there's a bunch of other combinations. And you can come up with some really cool ideas. But again, it's Diablo 4. It's simple. It's kind of shallow. But they're there. Overall, I think it's a kind of cool system. There's a lot of variety. They're going to be adding a lot of things where, again, there's like cross-class interactions. So you'll be inheriting skills from other classes. There's also the benefit of if you're using runes that are specifically giving you a skill your class already has, that effect. So for example, teleport, if we go back to the Yar rune, if we use this on the sorceress and you're not using Oculus, for example, or anything like that, it means that you will have whatever upgraded version of teleport. So if you've spec'd into teleport and you've got like the enhanced teleport or whatever the other passives are called, that is the type of teleport you'll use. So it kind of, in some ways, it also works as like a secondary trigger or a second charge of a skill that you may be using. Now, to be clear, rune words are going to be in the PTR. They're not for vanilla gameplay though. So once the Vessel of Hatred is out, you will need the Vessel of Hatred to be able to use rune words. I think that's a bit shit. Most people are probably going to get the Vessel of Hatred, granted, but rune words were initially intended for the base game, and then they were like, oh, we only have 2 sockets, so they're a bit shit. And then they didn't add them for so long, and now it's being added as a selling point for the expansion. That kind of sucks, to be honest. I think it should just be added in the game, considering we knew it was intended. I think this is something Blizzard do a lot. They'll say they're going to do something, like they said they were originally going to have PvP be really, really balanced, and then they gave up on that idea like a week before launch. And there's other features that they say they're going to add and then just basically sweep it under the rug and pretend that they never said it. Kind of shit, to be honest, but you know, what are you going to do? Corporation's going to cooperate. Bringing it back and focusing on the rune words themselves though, there's a couple of rules, requirements, and additional features to do with them. You can only have a maximum of 2 rune words, so a maximum of 4 runes, which you will combine together to create rune words. You will have an additional socket for your helm, so helms, chest piece, legs, and weapons can all have 2 sockets. They compete with gems in a way, so if you want to have 2 rune words, it means that you will have 4 less gems socketed in your equipment. Runes will also be tradable. Not only will they be tradable, but also in the same way as they were in Diablo 2, they'll be upgradable as well. So you'll be able to go to a vendor and you can go, I've got 3 of this rune of the same name, and you can trade those in for a chance to upgrade them. I believe rather than upgrading in a specific order, like in Diablo 2, basically every single rune was tiered. So if you'd start with the rank 1 rune, which was L, and that would upgrade to Eld, and Eld would upgrade to tier, and so on and so forth. In Diablo 4, it's a bit more random, and there's a chance that it could upgrade to a higher rarity. So you're going to have magic runes, you can have some rare runes, and then you can have some legendary runes. You can't equip the same rune twice. So if you're using 1 rune in 1 rune word, you can't then use that same rune in another rune word. Runes are stackable. There's also going to be a dedicated tab for stackables, such as gems and runes. Lastly, you'll actually be able to use runes to craft mythic uniques. For those less familiar with that terminology, uber uniques. So I believe, reading it from the blog, each one requires 1 resplendent spark, 10 legendary runes of a specific name, 10 rare runes of a specific name, and 10 magic runes of a specific name. So basically, if you farm all the runes, you've got yet again another avenue to make a specific uber or mythic unique of your top choice. Oh, and there is actually one last thing I forgot to mention. What they're calling the item quality rework. I actually think this is a genuinely good change. I thought the previous system again was quite arbitrary and a little bit stupid, and it kind of tied into the world tier system, which they're of course getting rid of. This now means they have the opportunity to get rid of sacred items and technically ancient items, but they've kind of reworked what ancient items are now. So when you're finding loot now, also this is synergistic with like the level squish as well. So when you find items now, the maximum item level, or item power as they call it, is level 750 for normal items. Once you enter the torment difficulty, you will be able to find ancient items. If you find an ancient item, they by default will have a greater affix. So ancient items are now no longer just an additional tier that you have to work towards. They're now your best in slot. They can have more than 1 greater affix. It's all a case of chance, but they are guaranteed to have a greater affix now. So essentially, they're no longer ancient in the way that we knew them. They're just items with greater affixes. Along with that, the item power increases. I believe all ancient items are item power 800. Sacred items, they're deleted. They're no longer a thing. They were a pointless thing in the first place, so farewell, we'll remember you. Non-ancestral items can be mastercrafted still, but only 4 times, or up to 4 times. Whereas an ancient item with a greater affix will be able to be upgraded up to the usual 12 times. Now, for those of you who play on the Eternal Realm, everything like everything you've heard about today is going to be adjusted and squished down, and you're going to be given something in some way or form in your items or paragon points or whatever for the items that are a legacy, let's say. I'm not going to go into all the details because I don't care about the Eternal Realm. I'm sorry. That is, for the most part, pretty much all the changes that we can expect coming in Diablo 4. There's new mythic items, by the way, a couple. One of them people got a bit hung up on in terms of like lore and what that means. There's an item that is specifically themed around Lilith, and it mentions in the implicit, or the inherent as they call it in Diablo 4, that you get 200% additional damage to demons and angels. And people are like, oh my god, it's a leak. Did they mean to do that? Probably yes. Yes, they probably did mean to do that. It's called a teaser. So you can expect to probably fight angels in the Vessel of Hatred. In what form? Are they converts because of Mephisto making them angry, or are they just a faction of Imperius who's like, you know what, humans suck, let's kill them all? We don't know. We were bound to fight them eventually, especially if you're familiar with the lore. Angels weren't exactly on our side. We're just a third party that they're very wary of. But yeah, that's otherwise pretty much it. Overall, I feel like I say this in almost every video or every stream where people ask me about Diablo 4 and the new patch and the new changes they're bringing every quarter. It's moving in the right direction. It is. I genuinely believe the game is moving in the right direction. I think it's moving at a snail's pace. And again, maybe I'm just spoiled by seeing what other developers achieve in the same time frame. And I've also, whilst I do enjoy Diablo 4, I've also reconciled with the fact that it's never going to be the action RPG that I personally want. I mentioned it before earlier in the video. They are specifically making a game that appeals to everyone. And the reason for that is because they want to be able to sell it to everyone, which means the design of the game is always going to be secondary to it being a product first. It's a product first, and therefore the design is affected by how well it can be monetized to as many people as possible. And that's a reality that I've come to grips with. It means that the game is always going to be significantly more shallow, significantly less complex, and a game I'm probably only going to play for a week each season, and then I'll bugger off and play PoE 2 or Last Epoch, or even Grim Dawn. They've got a new patch coming out. Titan Quest 2 is coming out at some point. We are, to be honest, otherwise feasting very, very well in this space. But overall, I'm happy with what I've seen. Again, some of it I'm like, maybe, like, we'll see for some of it. But overall, positive changes, some corporate bullshit, which is to be expected. But otherwise, yeah, hopefully it's going to be a good game. I'm going to be playing it on Game Pass because I have Game Pass anyway, so they're not getting any extra money from me either way. And if it doesn't meet my expectations, well, then I'll stop playing it. I've got another 12 other games that I can play on the side, so we're all good. I do want to hear what you guys think, though. Do you think I'm completely off base on some of the things I've said? Maybe you think this is the dumbest shit you've seen in your life and you don't want to even go anywhere near Diablo 4 ever again. Maybe you are creaming your pants and this is the best thing since sliced bread. Let me know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your feelings. I'm not your therapist, though. Do bear that in mind. But otherwise, if you liked the video, do give it a like. It helps with the algorithm gods. I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Brian the Pirate. Feel free to follow on there and hang out with me whenever I'm playing games live. And there's a Discord and all sorts of other things. It's like social media. Like, subscribe, buy yourself some cake. Farewell! I'll remember you.